About 2.5 years ago, Atlus launched Shin Megami Tensei V, and it was met with relative success, decent sales, and decent reviews overall. But it didn't take too long for the complaints to settle in either. The story was considered to be pretty dry, and people were dissatisfied. In typical Atlus fashion, a re-release of SMT V, Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance, aims to remedy that, with a brand new story and gameplay changes. So, did all of these changes make Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance worth it?
How can this be? A human walks among us.
Now, I'm not extremely familiar with SMT as a series. Even SMT V, I've only played through once. It has, for the most part, been about 2.5 years since I played the game, despite my attempts to revisit it for other endings. I never found the motivation to actually beat it again. There is a review I wrote, edited, and released within hours of completing the game. I wouldn't say that fully encompasses my current opinions, as they have changed a fair amount since then. So, SMT V was overall a decent game. While it lacked a compelling plot and interesting characters, it had a fun gameplay loop that was challenging enough to keep me interested purely on that front. Originally, I positioned my thoughts on the story that, since the ending was a choice about what the player believes is right, having characters who you are close to would mean that your choices would rely more on them rather than what you actually feel. However, I kind of don't feel that anymore. I mean, a good character could change your view. I feel like sacrificing a compelling narrative and characters just for the sake of having some moral choice at the end also just isn't that interesting. In a lot of games with moral choices, each choice you make will affect the story in some form, even if that means you have to make choices based on other characters. My stance at this point on SMT V is that it's a fun game with a great battle system, but the characters are left relatively unexplored and kind of half-baked. If this game was just going to be about making a choice, then there could have been even less narrative focus, and it wouldn't have changed how I felt. Whichever way I slice it, the conclusion I reach is the same. SMT V just wasn't that satisfying. And not in like a bittersweet way of an ending, it's more that just the characters and story needed more to actually feel impactful. In this way, this is also a review of the Canon of Creation route, so take that as you will. In the way of enhanced editions, Vengeance offers QOL changes and new features based on players' feedback, I assume. From rails to help you navigate terrain better, to additional side quests, to the ability to just hang out with your own demons, there's a lot the original game doesn't have, that this game does. These expansions to gameplay help improve the game, but they aren't exactly what I was so interested in. My original issues with SMT V were never about the gameplay. While it's not my favorite turn-based combat system, it's still good. The extra features like the Demon Hunt and the Magatsu rails are nice, but it didn't really change how I felt about those parts of the game. Demon Hunt isn't exactly complex, but you can get some funny dialogue, as the writing tends to do that, and some insights from guest characters. But for the most part, it's not a feature I truly cared for that much, because you're gonna fuse away most of these demons anyways, and it's not really Pokemon where you build bonds with them as much. Kind of just that you use them. I did raise one demon through the entire game, but that's not the point here. And speaking of guest characters, that's another thing this game has going for. Guests are other human characters who appear in the game that will occasionally join you. You can't use demon enhancement items on them, but they're useful enough. You'll probably get more mileage out of your own custom demon builds, but they're still there should you desire to use them. There are several new areas in the game as well. I won't go too deep into it, but the new areas will only appear if you're on the Canon of Vengeance route. For the most part, I was okay with them. They replace areas from the original game, so you don't need to worry about finding another 100 Mii-Men. Mii-Men? What's the plural? I don't know. Ultimately, what I do have to say is that the QOL changes are nice and the new features are cool, but they don't change my original thoughts on the gameplay. The combat's still great, and it can be challenging. However, some QOL does make the combat easier. But if you aren't keeping your party balanced through fusions and essences, then yeah, the game will still be pretty challenging. They can also neuter some of that challenge if you intend to use all the new features and miracles, though.
Huh? Wait, for real?
So the new story is interesting. It's not really about shaking up the existing themes of Shin Megami Tensei V. While this is a new route, the game still sticks to the same themes. Trust me, if you're expecting to be surprised by some plot twist or something, chances are, assuming you've played Canon of Creation already, you've seen most of what this story has to offer. What really changes is the presentation of the story. A lot of arcs the characters go through in the original are a bit more believable in Vengeance. That said, the general arcs do remain pretty unchanged. Again, this is not about changing the story as much as it is about presenting the story in a new light. I don't take issue with this. In fact, it's good. I think it's great that the story sticks to its guns, and it doesn't try to change just because people weren't happy with the original story. And the idea that one person being added to the plot could so drastically shake things up is also great. It is not always necessary to show instead of tell. I think sometimes telling is a more effective way to get a point across when you only need 5 seconds to explain it. But Vengeance existing alongside Creation means the game is intended to be played at least 2 times. Some developments are split between the 2 storylines, which means that if you haven't played Creation, Vengeance will have moments where you say, well, I wish I could have seen that, and vice versa. Is this a problem? That depends on your perspective. For me, it does feel like parts of Vengeance just don't work that well. I think having Yoko and Tao present to make you question certain things is great. Seeing Yoko grow and even almost change her view is an effective way to showcase her character, and having Tao question her beliefs about the angels being truly good is also great for this. Getting a chance to interact more with Yuzuru and Dazai is an effective way to also show and make you feel like they might actually be friends, that maybe they could get along. It does make some plot points hit a bit harder. However, there's a point in this game where things just kind of start to happen. Explanations are explained to you without feeling the need to show you anything. I did feel like Vengeance was overall a stronger showing than Creation was. Unfortunately, Creation just doesn't have that many memorable moments for me. I'm just very mixed on this situation because I understand the point is to make you play both stories, but I still feel like some characters kind of do just disappear. It may have to do with the side quests I didn't do, but I'll revisit that when I can. To be clear, I'm just mixed on the narrative. In the end, I think Vengeance is a net positive for SMT V. It does not make the game worse. I do think the idea that both the angels and demons have bad parts is good, but man is it really easy to hate the demons. The light in which the game presents them is just not great in general. Like, it starts off immediately presenting them poorly, even without other characters telling you the demons are bad, but both factions wind up being incredibly self-righteous. And it made me question where my allegiances lie, which is good for this kind of story. They're also, spoiler, I guess, if you want to skip this, just skip to the next chapter, this is almost over. Vengeance does not have a centrist route. Instead, your choices you make throughout the game will lead you to either ending. You don't get to choose at the end, which is also actually pretty good. However, that also means that, regardless of what you may think, you're going to wind up stuck with one ending or the other. You're not going to get to choose which one you want, even after hearing their final plans. Which, you know what, it's fine, because that means your choices do matter at the end.
Hey, good to see everyone made it here in one piece.
And it is of course entirely possible that I'm looking at this game in the wrong light. It could be that SMT V is not trying to tell you the most character complex narrative, which I do agree with that. The story is much more driven about your decision and what you believe is right. By inserting characters into the narrative, it can create an issue where your choices can be affected by either empathy or sympathy, among other emotions. And while I believe parts of this to be true, I don't believe this in full. And due to the nature of this game, adapting real-world mythology as characters, there is a level of understanding of these mythological characters that you need to know about, because it likely influences their characters in the story. Without reading that lore, you may find yourself unable to understand why certain characters are the way they are. So I can fully accept that my views on the story are flawed in some form, but I also believe that this game can have both a character-driven narrative as well as a moral conflict. In the end, this is just a passing thought I'm having. I believe that SMT V Vengeance is a good game as a full package. You can break down its parts here and there and say some parts are good and some parts are bad, but altogether it's good. The battle system is great, The animations of the attacks are jaw-dropping, the fusion systems are so much fun to use, and the game just looks better than it did on the Switch. But you could be playing this on the Switch, so... The narrative itself is not really a standard JRPG story. It definitely has unique flavors, and I think in some ways it reminds me of how some games like to tell their stories with lore bits writing out characters, but not forcing you to interact with them, if that makes sense. I'm fairly neutral on Vengeance's story. While I didn't really have a lot of positives to say about it in this review, I find it more interesting to talk about the negatives or the neutrals that I had because my view on it is so conflicting. The net is neutral, I guess. So I'm clocking this game in at a solid good, and that's my opinion. You're free to disagree. And you can let me know what you think of SMT V Vengeance in the comments down below. You can tell me your thoughts of the original and of the new storyline. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Atlas, Persona, JRPG related, maybe SMT, we'll see. I might go back to finish the stories, the side quests, and the other route of the story, but we'll see what happens. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.